Hi, Sean back. Thanks for listening to Meredith McGuinness's interview earlier. Very important interview. A couple of things that she said that really struck is that the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of action. Now, we've heard people like Nick Stern say that in the past, but it's not often we've heard essentially the Minister of Finance of Europe saying that. This is very important. She also talked about the importance of just transition, bringing people along with us, ensuring the poor are cared for in this process of change. Very important comments going forward. In the next session, we're going to talk about one of the tools of change, work on a common ground taxonomy between Europe and China. There's a bit of a story to taxonomy that you may not know. You know, the green and sustainable bonds market, as you know, if you've been listening into previous sessions in this conference, is approaching $2 trillion outstanding this year. That's an incredible jump from about 10 billion just a few years ago. It's growing enormously. And of course, it's leaching into other products now. We have Goldman Sachs announcing that it's going to do green equity. We don't know what that looks like yet, but it's an interesting announcement. There are benefits in a large multi-asset class or multi-physical asset class type of portfolio arrangement, as we see as fund after fund after fund rolls out a green or a climate fund investing in green bonds from a multiplicity of sources. We get scale, we get economy, we get business for banks. They start allocating staff when they weren't allocating staff before. We get governments thinking, I can get private sector capital for my public sector priorities, and that's exactly what's going on around the world. And above all, we get this idea, successfully established now, thanks to the improved performance of green bonds compared to vanilla bonds, of this being an opportunity, a positive correlation with investment in green rather than a negative, which when I started in this game 10 or 12 years ago, everyone was saying, well, it's going to cost us more to make this transition. Of course, people are going to pay up to the nose and so on. Folks know there are better returns involved in this market. You will get lower risk, and bond investors in particular are focused on, are defensive. As Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, once said, he made money not by giving people yield, but by ensuring they didn't lose their money. And bonds, green bonds, are superior in that characteristics. Look to our pricing report of a couple of days ago and the volatility discussion they were having there, and we'll hear a bit more about that this afternoon. The main child of the green bond market has ended up being green definitions work, known as taxonomy in Europe, which is spreading across the world as an idea. This idea, I'm going to say, that we started in 2012 with the launch of the Common Bonds taxonomy of providing guidance of what counts. It's not about metrics that you have to imply. It's like saying if you've got a solar farm, it's a solar farm, it's in. And what kind of steel plant is in and not? Watch this space for guidance to come. What kind of car, terrestrial carbon, CO2 producing machine is in or not? Well, I can tell you now, we have said very clearly, thanks to our carbon metrics that we've published, 50 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilometre travelled till 2025 and then zero, hybrids don't make it. They're not ambitious enough. Electric hybrids, smaller ones, do for another few years, another 3 years, whereas hydrogen cars or electric cars do qualify, zero tailpipe emissions. Do we worry about the emissions from a coal plant or the solar plant? We're discounting those. Why? Because we can't wait for the grid to go green to prepare the infrastructure for when it will be green. We do things in parallel. These are fruits of discussions at a taxonomy level. The grid will be green everywhere by 2050, and our fleet will be electric, and our rail fleet will be electric everywhere, and we'll have both things coming together in a zero carbon transport environment. So you can sort of see there's a lot of discussions to be had there. It's not, we believe, up to individual companies to simply make a claim and let the world judge. Most investors, beyond the largest one, don't have due diligence capacity. They need support here. So we've provided guidance in the Climate Bonds taxonomy and certification scheme for many years. There's now over $200 billion of bonds certified against that. But above all, we've encouraged governments to pick up this idea. In 2014, I had the privilege of being a member of the People's Bank of China Green Finance Task Force, chaired by Dr. Ma Jun. Unfortunately, he can't join us today. He's had a personal crisis, but he has been at every climate bonds conference for the last few years. He has been leading the green finance work in China. In 2015, the People's Bank of China brought out green bond regulations and referenced a green projects definitions, a green projects catalogue of green definitions, a taxonomy. It has guided the development of the Chinese market. They updated that taxonomy early this year to exclude fossil fuel electricity generation, broadly consistent with the European discussions that have been going on. Because in 2016, when I was a member of the high-level expert group on sustainable finance, we recommended a taxonomy in Europe, and the Commission took it up. And you heard Meredith McGuinness talk about that in the previous interview. That work has shown the power of governments getting behind, major governments getting behind this. The discussion around taxonomy has dwarfed anything we could do at the Climate Bonds Initiative. We now have most of the major economies of the world looking at taxonomy solutions. We have live definitional projects all looking to be coordinated with each other. Very important point to make. In Singapore, in Vietnam, in Thailand, in fact, ASEAN central banks. In South Africa, they've published a draft taxonomy. In Colombia, that's about to publish theirs. In Chile, that's about to start working on theirs. And so on and so on. In the United Kingdom, where the new green gilt, 15 billion sterling, will reference the UK taxonomy that's coming through. And of course, the taxonomy is much more than green bonds. In Europe, it's all about disclosure requirements for banks, investors, and corporations. In other words, it reaches across the financial system to provide guidance for what we've got to do when we know we have to change our economies and societies very fast. We need that guidance because we can make mistakes. If Volkswagen was to build a diesel car plant outside of Duisburg, it might save 15% emissions. What's not to like? It looks good, right? Unfortunately, transport is about 25% of global energy emissions. We need to reduce it much more steeply than that. We need to shift to electric. As I mentioned before, hybrids don't fit the taxonomy approach of adequate ambition in the transport sector. So Volkswagen's plant for diesel would be counterproductive. It would reduce emissions 15%, but would block the chance to build an electric or maybe even a hydrogen plant, and therefore counterproductive, because we need to get them on a much steeper transition pathway. Well, luckily, Volkswagen's actually building electrical plants. Good on them. They're making the right decisions. But that discussion about is a little bit good enough or not is critical to this understanding of taxonomy. Science-based taxonomy consistent with the Paris Climate Change Agreement is what we've been seeing happening around the world. We're going to hear today about work between the European taxonomy that you know about and the Chinese taxonomy that you probably don't know as much about, but has been so influential for 6 years now. So that's the point of the next session. I want to say that what this is really about is the front edge of discussion about what we have to do. The understanding of what we have to do is not common. The idea that 15% reductions in emissions actually may be counterproductive is a novel idea for most people. I mean, it sounds good at first. And yet, if we are to shift our economies, rephrase that, and yet when we shift our economies to meet the targets we have now thankfully set ourselves in the major economies of the world, ambitious 2030 targets, this discussion of what can be in is critical. It's changing. What looked good 5 years ago doesn't work anymore in so many areas. That discussion, influenced by the science of what we have to do, is absolutely critical at this point. So the discussion, the argument, the difficult edges of taxonomy are the front lines of confronting what it is we actually have to do. No country in the world, well, no major economy in the world, has a climate change plan yet commensurate with the 2030 targets it's committed to. They're trying to work it out. They are working it out. We need to support them, all of us. We need to push, but one thing we need to be sure of, it has to be commensurate. Read the International Energy Agency's Net Zero by 2030 report. Be shocked by some of the findings, but the modelling is spot on. Read the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's recent report of a few weeks ago, the chapter on methane. Understand the danger, the risk on the methane side of our energy system. And you'll get an idea of what we have to not do, as well as what we have to do. But of course, Green Bond is about opportunity. We're focusing on what we have to do to get the discussion going. Always remember, there is a tough edge underneath all of this, because there is some stuff, folks, we have to change. Let's look at systemic approaches to have a change, regulatory approaches, making sure, as Meredith McGuinness says, that we bring everyone with us, that we focus on the just transitions part of it. Hey, now I want to move across to a little bit of a description of the Common Ground Taxonomy. Are we online, Bridget and Boulle?
We are online, Sean.
Yes, online.
Before we start, I need to say a thank you to our sponsors. We've got, as you know, a bunch of sponsors that have made a huge difference to this event being possible. We wouldn't be here without them. It's our global sponsor, JP Morgan. And I'm going to say, who would have thought JP Morgan would be so focused on green when a few years ago there were a lot of criticisms. But if you listen to the interviews I've done with some of their people, it's a really exciting story of transition and change. But the other organisations too, Ping An of China Asset Management. This is the largest insurer of the world, and one of the largest asset managers of the world, joining us as a sponsor. Moody's, Citi, Luxembourg Green Exchange, Credit Suisse, Refinitiv, BNP Paribas Asset Management, IHS Markit, and my old friends at Allianz Bernstein, FSD Africa, helping develop capital markets in the continent, UK, part of UK Aid, and so many others. Folks, we count on you, we depend on you, we appreciate you. Inter-American Development Bank, our partner in so many projects. International Capital Markets Association, the host of the Green Bond Principles, a critically important development in the reporting and transparency world. Our friends at Mizuho in Japan, leading issuance in that market, which is growing like gangbusters, by the way. And of course, the IFC and Ashurst. Thank you. We have a few housekeeping measures to deal with in the next slide. There's a Q&A button. Ask questions. We'll try and answer them. We'll be answering them in text if we can't answer them online. And other questions to the chat. There's interpretation. Look for the headphone button. Lots of languages. In fact, we need to update this slide because we've added Japanese today. So if you're coming in from Japan, please know there's a Japanese translation on top of the Portuguese, Spanish, Mandarin, and French. Everything's being recorded. You can listen to it for ages and tell your friends about it, more to the point. There are cool networking tools. Try them out. Next, please. Now I need to introduce our two wonderful first guests. Bridget Boulle, who's at the Club of Honest Initiative. She's got a title called Production Manager, but she does everything. And she's working from our side on helping make this taxonomy work, this Common Ground Taxonomy, for a success. We're supporting the European Commission in our efforts here. And Boulle Wang, who's a senior fellow and project lead at Tsinghua University's, Boulle, I can never remember what the NIFR acronym stands for. You'll have to tell me in a second, in China. But more to the point, she's a key member of Dr. Ma Jun's team. And Dr. Ma Jun is head of the Green Finance Association of China and also special advisor to the governor of the Central Bank, People's Bank of China, on green finance, and has really been the key pioneer in bringing together green finance discussions in China. He's representing the People's Bank of China in the discussions between the European Commission and China. So this is a government-to-government initiative, that we're supporting. We'll hear a little bit more from Bridget and Boulle about the detail in a second. I just want to alert you that Marcel Haag, who's the Director for Horizontal Policies at DG FISMA, the European Commission, will jump in at the end for a few comments. Dr. Marjun has unfortunately had a very sad personal family crisis, and he's been called away at short notice. He sends his apologies. It'll be the first conference he's missed in a long time, I have to say, of ours. Our hearts are with you, Jun. We hope that everything will work out all right. In the meantime, Bridget and Boulle, I think it's time to turn to you.
Thank you very much, Sean, and hello everybody, and welcome to this session of the conference. Despite the fact that Marjun can't be here today, and we're all very sad about that, I am very glad today to be sharing the floor with Boulle. Boulle and I, together with some of our team members, have been working on this particular project for over a year and a half now, and I'm very pleased to share the floor with her today, as it's very much been a joint effort with all of us. Sean has already set the stage around some of the taxonomy developments in Europe and the importance of these developments. Boulle is going to tell us in a minute about how the China taxonomy developments have come to be. And that just sets the scene for where we're going to talk about, which is the Common Ground Taxonomy. So the taxonomy developments in Europe, I would like to just add one or two really important things about why they're important, these developments. The first is that they've been very granular, much more granular than I, when this was first announced, ever anticipated it would be. The second is they're transparent. So they're not based on proprietary methodologies. They can be used by many different actors, stakeholders, and jurisdictions. And the third is that they intend to be science-based, so really based on the evolving science. And I wanted to say those three things, as I think that sets the scene for the taxonomy developments around the world and in China as well. We're going to talk about the Common Ground Taxonomy in a moment, but before that, Boulle just wants to touch on some of the developments that have been happening in China. Boulle, over to you.
My pleasure, Bridget. So this diagram provides a retrospective view on China's green finance development pathway and highlighted some important milestones. And based on China's experience during the past decade, taxonomy is a most effective tool for aligning sustainable investments. By the end of September 2019, the outstanding green loans reached 10.3 trillion RMB, and with non-performing ratio as low as 0.73%. And the green bond issuance reached 3.4 billion. Here you can see that since 2012, and China has issued green loan catalog, green bond catalog, and green industry catalog, green loan taxonomy, and the green bond taxonomy. Next slide, please. And on this slide, I provided an overview of China's green financial system. The 5 interlinked pillars of the green finance framework include the financial standards, policy incentives, product innovation, risk and impact assessment, rating and disclosure. The green taxonomy is a classification system which identifies a list of assets and projects that are eligible to be financed with green finance or sustainable finance products. It helps prevent greenwash, hence protects market integrity. It is also a fundamental standard for carrying out other financial market practices such as green bond verification, asset-backed securitization, and information disclosure by financial institutions. And in summary, taxonomy is the core enabling standard for building healthy green capital markets. Back to you, Bridget.
Thank you, Boulle. So the Common Ground Taxonomy work takes place within the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, it was launched in 2019 with a number of countries as its core members, and is now spread to all the countries you can see in the bottom right, including Argentina, Canada, Kenya, Morocco, the UK, obviously the EU, and China. It has 3 main objectives: to exchange and disseminate information and promote best practice, to compare different initiatives and identify barriers and opportunities to help scale up sustainable finance, and to enhance international coordination. and where appropriate, try to align approaches. So the ultimate aim of the objective of the IPSF is to scale up the mobilization of private capital towards environmentally sustainable investments. So that's the IPSF in a very short nutshell. It launched a working group on taxonomies as well as part of its work, and this is where the Common Ground Taxonomy fits. So because of the IPF's work as a really unique multilateral form of dialogue and between policymakers, the IPSF launched this working group and with the following objectives. It wanted to comprehensively compare existing taxonomies and understand their differences and commonalities, and then identify these commonalities in their respective approaches and the criteria and in the outcomes. So work began in 2020 with the EU and China as the most advanced at the time in taxonomy development, and this was the foundation of a Common Ground Taxonomy. So we began work last year, but since then, obviously many countries around the world, some of them are members of the IPSF and some are not, have started the process of developing taxonomies, including IPSF members, India, Japan, UK, and Indonesia, among others. So there are many different developments going on around the world in taxonomies, and this starting work covers the EU and China. So you might be wondering, what exactly is a Common Ground Taxonomy? And I do get asked this question rather a lot. And I think it's really important to establish that. So we've talked about the role of the Common Ground Taxonomy to highlight commonalities between the taxonomies that already exist within the IPSF membership. But the important thing to note is that the work today is a common ground taxonomy, not a common taxonomy. And I think that's quite important to note. So in other words, the difference is that it puts forward the areas that are already in common, and it's not yet seeking to standardize taxonomy. So it's not a single taxonomy adopted by both jurisdictions. There'll be no requirement at this stage, who knows what will happen in the future, but at this stage, there is no requirement for either jurisdiction to change their taxonomy. So that's quite an important element of the taxonomy. And so it aims to find the common ground between them. Initially, it will cover activities only that are in common. And there are more complex areas that are quite difficult to compare that will hopefully be brought in over time. One of the aims of having a common ground taxonomy and all this work that's been undertaken is that it can be used as a tool for other jurisdictions. I've mentioned already that there are many jurisdictions all around the world that are carrying out taxonomy developments, and we very much hope this will be a tool they can use when designing their own taxonomies. So as I mentioned, Boulle and I and our colleagues have been working on this for over a year and a half. The EU and China has been the starting point, as these taxonomies at the time of the start of the work had been completed and announced, or in the EU's case, in part completed with the first two objectives. Last year, we finished an overarching comparison, which looked at the objectives, the scope, and the different approaches of the taxonomies. And we'll go over a little bit of that in a minute. And the real nitty-gritty work that's now being done is the detailed line-by-line comparison. And that's currently very near completed. Boulle and I both have lots of different spreadsheets that we are trading over and over again to come up with this detailed line-by-line comparison. At the moment, it covers climate change mitigation and substantial contribution within the EU, that terminology. So other parts of the taxonomy, like adaptation and other objectives, the intention is to cover those over time, but this was the starting point, is to look at mitigation and particularly at substantial contribution. We hope that the do no significant harm provisions under the EU taxonomy will be able to be included as much as possible in the first draft, at least in a narrative form, and more work will be done over time to include those. So that's the work that has been done to date. And Marcel will also cover a bit of the timeline over the next few months. So Boulle, I think I might bring you in here in a minute, but I mentioned that we had done an overview comparison of the EU and China. And this covered some quite important points which we're going to raise now. So the first is on the objectives of the two taxonomies. You can see on the right, there's a column which shows the China objectives and the EU objectives. And I think this demonstrates quite well how, even though the objectives seem different from the outset, China has 3, the EU has 6, there is a very strong degree of overlap, at least from a high level perspective. And I think this has come up over and over again in the work that we've been doing, is they're often moving in the same direction, even if they don't map exactly on top of each other. So that's the basics of the objectives. You can see climate change response is one of the objectives in China. This is covered in the EU by 2 objectives, mitigation and adaptation. In China, environmental improvement is an overarching objective, and this is covered in the EU under water and marine resources, and also the protection of biodiversity. And in China, resource efficiency and circular economy is covered in the EU by transition to a circular economy, as well as pollution and prevention and control. Boulle, did you want to add anything on the overarching objectives?
No, I think that's fine for the objectives.
Okay, great.
I can share a little bit on eligibility later. Please go ahead.
Then we looked at the scope of the different taxonomies that are available. In China at the moment, the Green Bond Endorsed Project Catalogue covers green bonds. And the EU, the scope is much broader. So it covers member states, financial market participants, and large companies. I won't get into detail now on all the disclosure requirements that have to be met by these different actors, but I think suffice to say for now that the scope is quite broad and will affect many different stakeholders across a number of particularly companies and financial market participants. Then the approach to defining eligibility is quite important, and this has impacted the way that we've done the Common Ground Taxonomy work. China, Boulle, would you like to comment just briefly on the China approach?
Yes. So because green sustainable activities are still a small portion of the whole economy, the activity descriptions are more granular than existing sector classification. And China's taxonomy presents a detailed list of eligible business projects and technological solutions under 6 categories, and sets key technical criteria by directly referring to some critical national industrial standards. The detailed description of the activity then provides some further eligibility criteria for inclusion. This implies that activities can be eligible only if the activities has been included in the list and comply with the applicable standards. The starting point is that green transition is technology-driven, and some innovative technological solutions could be applied to multiple economic sectors to reduce environmental pollution, greenhouse gas emission, and enable circular economy. And there are merits of both the EU's technology-neutral approach and China's whitelist approach. While the former one can cover broader divisions, and the latter can jump out of the box by directly listing some innovative technologies. I'll let Bridget to elaborate more on the EU taxonomy approach. Back to you, Bridget.
Thanks, Boulle. So yeah, as Boulle says, the China taxonomy takes a more of a whitelist approach, listing green technologies that are eligible. The EU takes a slightly different approach. It uses an economic sector mapping and down to the granular activity level in the form of the NACE code. And then based on these, it provides technical screening criteria for these and how each of these can be seen as green. So it's a technology neutral approach and provides technical screening criteria across a much broader section of the economy. I think one example of where this might come out as a useful example for you to understand is in manufacturing. So the China taxonomy focuses very much on manufacturing as it impacts and as it affects green technologies, so the manufacturing of wind turbines, solar panels, etc. And the EU taxonomy is a bit broader because it covers the NACE code. So it includes, for example, the manufacturing of cement and how the technical screening criteria that is green under the EU taxonomy. So that's the work we have done on the overarching comparison, and we also looked at some of the other eligible requirements like do no significant harm and some of the local laws that are applicable in both jurisdictions. Then as a next step, I'm going to outline very briefly the methodology that we've been using to look at the common ground. So the first thing we did, and I think Boulle will pick up a bit later on why we did this, is we mapped all the activities within both taxonomies to a common code, so that we didn't have EU on the left and China on the right, or China on the left and EU on the right. We were comparing them and mapping them both to a common code, and that was a useful neutral starting point. Once we'd done that, we looked at each line of that common taxonomy, and we looked at the detailed description and technical screening criteria to give each one a different scenario. So the first was low-hanging fruit, which is the kind of quite easy areas like wind power, where there's direct eligibility and there's very strong overlap among both types of criteria. The second was when we decided that either the scope from the EU was narrower or more stringent, and in that case we followed the EU criteria, and hydropower is an example of that. The third was to follow China, so the other way around. So the China scope was narrower or more stringent, and manufacturing energy efficiency equipment is one area of that. The fourth, which is somewhat named a little bit mythically, aligned similarity. And this was areas where we had to do more work because we could see that they were going in the same direction, but it was quite difficult to map them accurately. And water collection and treatment were examples of this where we faced some challenges. And then number 5 and 6 were either where we had unclear alignment, was very difficult to map, or significant divergence. An example of unclear alignment, I've already spoken about manufacturing, where some parts of the taxonomy they don't cover, either one or the other won't cover the other one's definitions, and chemicals is one area of this. Or with this divergence, like in transmission and distribution network for gases. So that was our basic methodology. The next step for that, as you could probably imagine, number 1, 2, and 3, those green areas, fall quite easily into the Common Ground Taxonomy, and we're busy fleshing that out at the moment. Number 4, where there is some similarity, we've done quite a lot of extra work over the last few weeks to try and see which of those could fall into the taxonomy and which are outside of that for now. And number 5 or 6 are not part of the initial Common Ground Taxonomy. So that's the work that we are busy finalizing at the moment. And I think Marcel will touch on that a little bit later. Boulle, I think you wanted to touch on some of the key lessons learned of the process that we've gone through to date.
Well,
Yes.
thank you for granting me the privilege to share the lessons. So there are some key lessons learned during the process of the CGT work. And firstly, starting drafting the taxonomy using a globally recognized industry classification code, which allows different stakeholders understand the industrial activities based on the primary productive activities carried out, hence the all-around relevance to sustainability. And a second is, as a leading knowledge partner of G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, IPSF, as stated by Bridget earlier, is playing a key role in developing demonstration project, namely the Common Ground Taxonomy 2021 version, as an effort to improve comparability, interoperability, and consistency of taxonomies globally. And third is IPSF and its experts, including us, can also provide technical assistance such as capacity building, stakeholder engagement, etc., to countries that need professional support. That's it.
Thank you, Boulle.
Fantastic, Boulle. Fantastic, Bridget. I think we have Marcel online now. If I can get the team to bring him up. Hey, Marcel. Nice to see you. We need to adjust the camera a little bit on my screen so we can see your full face, Marcel. Ah, it is Marcel. I need to introduce you, Marcel.
I cannot see myself, Sean, and I cannot see you.
Team, I hope we can help Marcel with seeing us, but in terms of adjusting the screen, we need the screen a little bit down a little bit. But look, we're going to go ahead, Marcel. Marcel is the Director of Horizontal Policies at DG FISMA, essentially the European Commission's Ministry of Finance, with a lot more titles associated with the name of it in the European Commission, and has been the the driver of this work on the European side, working with Dr. Ma-Jun, who you've heard earlier, unfortunately can't join us today because of a family emergency. And as I said earlier, and I'll say it again, Ma-Jun, our hearts are with you if you're hearing this message. We hope that things can be resolved and improve as quickly as possible, but we know it's a tough time, and we'll be thinking of you. Marcel, you've just heard Boulle and Bridget talk a little bit about the lessons coming out of the Common Ground Taxonomy work, but I wanted to ask you to comment on the purpose and what got this project going from the Commission's point of view, this idea of a Common Ground Taxonomy. How did this start?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Sean, and thank you for having me. And I'm joining you in your thoughts that going out to Ma-Jun. The idea of a Common Ground Taxonomy really emerged when we launched the IPSF, the International Platform on Sustainable Finance. When we launched it together with 7 other jurisdictions, and China was one of them, we wanted to make sure that that our sustainable finance policies were discussed internationally, and that we could share best practices. We also wanted to facilitate cooperation between jurisdictions to prevent, to the extent possible, unnecessary market fragmentation. So this was really an attempt to align international initiatives. It's clear that this is a long-term process, but we think it is crucial that there is a level of comparability between the sustainable finance frameworks. And here, taxonomies are a natural starting point. They are core. They are the basis on which our regulatory frameworks build sustainable finance tools, such as labels or standards. They're also the basis for our disclosure and reporting frameworks. So in a way, they were a natural starting point, and that's why we started with the Common Ground Taxonomy, and we set up this working group in the context of the IPSF that I have the pleasure and the privilege to co-chair with Ma-Jun. Our objective is to precisely what the initiative says, to identify the common ground. It was also intuitively natural to start with China and the EU, because these two jurisdictions were among the first movers, but we do not want to step there. Do not want to stop there. The initiative, as you know, is open also to other jurisdictions.
And Marcel, it's been interesting as these conversations have developed at work between the Chinese side and the European side, the extent to which other members of the IPSF, and for those listeners who don't know, the International Platform on Sustainable Finance now represents over half the world's GDP and population. It's a pretty extraordinary collection of countries that are saying they're committed to work on sustainable finance and want to collaborate and work together. You've had other members joining these calls from multiple countries to listen in to the work report from the China-European. This is a fantastic testament to the engagement, isn't it? You must be very happy.
No, we are quite satisfied with the interest that the International Platform for Sustainable Finance is attracting from around the world. We're also very pleased to see that other ongoing international initiatives are drawing on the work of the IPSF. Let me mention in that context the G20 working group on sustainable finance that has appointed the IPSF as a knowledge partner in the area of taxonomies. So we see that the IPSF also has an impact on activities in other international fora.
This is a really important development. For the listeners who don't know, the G20 has a Green and Sustainable Finance Working Group, which is co-chaired by Dr. Ma Jun, who couldn't join us today, representing the People's Bank of China and the US Treasury. But there are many other countries and regulators involved in those conversations. And as Marcel's just pointed out to us, the IPSF is supporting that with work, and including around taxonomies. So this will drift into the global discussion, Manuel. There's no doubt about it. And people are anxious, investment community, about this perception of fragmentation, in the sense that while we've got taxonomy conversations, thanks especially to development in Europe over the last couple of years, now going like wildfire around the world. There's about 20-odd countries working on taxonomies. They are generally referencing the work that we're doing, the European taxonomy, or in some cases like the Mongolian taxonomy, the Chinese taxonomy, and they will reference the Common Ground Taxonomy. So it actually, the cohesion that's coming through is good, isn't it? I mean, we're not actually seeing as much different as people might perceive there to be. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think we have reasons to be optimistic here. As you know, the taxonomy is a science-based instrument, so it should, in principle, be possible to achieve a lot of common ground. But then, obviously, we also have to take into account regional and local differences. Whilst I think I'm optimistic that we can achieve a lot of convergence, maybe 100% will not be necessary, or maybe not even desirable. I think the more other jurisdictions study the methodologies that our Chinese partners and the EU are using, the more they understand the complexities of the taxonomy, the more likely it is that we will see more alignment over time. But I think we should not underestimate the size of the. It is a daunting task, but I am optimistic that over time we will achieve substantial convergence.
It certainly is a daunting task. I liken it to the development of an electric car. You know, once it's done, people will be able to get in, push the button and drive off. But while we're developing it, it's complicated with the wiring, and that's what we're in the middle of right now. But folks out there, look to the future. Our objective is simplicity and clarity. At least I think so. I want to ask Boulle Wang for a moment. In terms of the Chinese perspective on the benefits and purpose, there's what Marcel is saying, Jill. I mean, how's the narrative on the People's Bank of China, the China side, looking in relation to benefits and purpose and the reason for doing this? Give us an update.
I think there are several very good reasons. And for example, people can, for the green bond issuers, and they can voluntarily endorse or use the Common Ground Taxonomy. And people and the issuers from Europe, they can come to the China market and enter into the pen bond market. And for issuers from China, they can go to the European market. I think one great merit of having a Common Ground Taxonomy is really it will become a common language. So we know that people from Europe and people from China, they describe similar things, but just use a different language. And a good metaphor is, for example, you ask people, how's the weather look like? And you ask people, Guten Tag, and you say, Ni hao. But all of you are just greeting people. I think that's a proper metaphor. That's my view. Thank you.
That's a great metaphor, I have to say, Boulle. That's very good. So Marcel, that sounds very consistent with what we're talking about in Europe, from my perspective. Please let me know if I've got something wrong here. But more importantly, tell us a little bit about what else the IPSF is doing and your ambition in that area. We've got the Common Ground Taxonomy, but there are other things on the agenda as well. Am I right? You're on mute, Marcel, unfortunately.
Okay, now I'm back.
Thank you.
Now I'm back. Indeed, the China-EU Common Ground Taxonomy is just a first step in a long process of ensuring comparability of taxonomies. In the future, we will need to keep improving the Common Ground Taxonomy and broaden the scope of comparison, and also looking for solutions to address the methodological challenges that we have encountered. Also, our ambition is to progressively integrate new taxonomies from other IPSF jurisdictions in this comparison exercise. So we try to continue to feed into the outcome of the work of other international fora, in particular the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group. But beyond taxonomies, our ambition is to cover eventually and over time the full sustainable finance agenda of the participating members.
And Marcel, a couple of days ago, the European Commission announced the beginning, or rather the launch of its green bond framework for its ambitious green bond issuance program. 225 billion euros is, I think, the target. This is extraordinary, right? And it is clear that they're intending to be consistent with the principles of the taxonomy. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that is a consistency that we aim to achieve over time. So the European Union does what it can at this point, but for the time being, we're talking about a partial alignment, which we expect over time to increase.
Well, I guess it's true that the taxonomy is not yet done. It's still before the European Parliament. So we're waiting to hear from our legislators. Yeah. Are they going to sign off on this?
That is a key challenge. That is a key challenge. Is that our taxonomy framework is not yet fully complete, and therefore,
which of course
we have to somehow plug the gaps.
Which of course adds a little bit of excitement to the Common Ground Taxonomy, because there's always a risk until it's actually signed off that there'll have to be some changes to the European side, and then we'll have to go back to redrafting at the Common Ground Taxonomy. But look, I think it's looking okay at the moment. Tell us a bit about timing. What can people expect in terms of the announcements of some detail here? What's the current thinking?
Yeah, now we expect to have the first report on the Common Ground Taxonomy ready by November, and I think Boulle has already referred to that. So hopefully we are on time for the COP26, and that will be our first step. Then we will have to continue to work. There is a lot of work that needs to be done on methodologies, and the working group of the IPSF will address these once the report has been finalized. As you know, we will also have a number of high-level principles that we identify in the report, and we will continue to work on recommendations to help improve the interoperability and comparability of the taxonomies. So the focus will very much remain on improving our comparative work on the taxonomies.
This is an incredibly important development, Marcel. I'm going to suggest to our listeners for the announcements of COP, we have guidance coming through, which is a common guidance between the two of the 3 or 4 major economies in the world around what is green. We're trying to interoperability of the financial markets, sustainable finance markets and so on, to help issuers in China for green bonds issue in Europe, but also to allow European investors to better identify what are investments in China that will qualify their portfolios. There are lots and lots of implications for this coming forward. So this is very important, especially in the context of the work around taxonomies that's happening everywhere right now, which is a necessary work around providing clarity about what the science is telling us really do qualify as investments going forward. And you'll hear tomorrow from someone in Marcel's team, Martin Spolk, talking about one component of this work, which is the transitions work, and how that implies, which is a critical part of the European taxonomy and the discourse around taxonomy. And you'll also hear later on this afternoon from a colleague of Marcel's International Relations of DigiFISMA, Pauline, I never remember how to pronounce her surname, Marcel, you'll have to help me, who's going to talk about the implications for trade between the countries. Pauline Jelmek-Hadek.
It's Paulina Dejme. Paulina Dejme.
Thank you. I have to say she was incredibly impressive when I did a preparation call of her. You've got a great team in there, Marcel, working in this area. So the European developments are very important for the COP, for the broader discussion in our Green Windows session later on this afternoon, which is the opportunity for deeper collaboration between the major economies of the world. If China, Europe, the US, and let's say India agree on things such as a Common Ground Taxonomy, folks, the world will follow. And that's the key thing we need to understand. We have the opportunity here because China, Europe, and the US and the other major economies like Japan and the UK have now agreed on ambitious 2030, not just 2050, 2060, but 2030 targets to go forward. And of course, this Common Ground Taxonomy underpins or is a key tool in delivering that. And hopefully, Marcel, we can make rapid progress. As Meredith McGuinness said just beforehand, we need to act. The cost of inaction is way higher than the cost of action. Exciting times, Marcel. Your work must have changed recently.
Oh, indeed. I couldn't agree more. And here we hope that the IPSF can play an important role, also as a convener and as an information broker. We do not only have half of the world's GDP in terms of jurisdictions around the table, but we also count among our observers the network of central banks and supervisors for greening the financial system, the coalition of finance ministers. We have the key international development banks and key international organizations, the IMF, the UNEP, the OECD, to just name a few of them among our observers. And this is an incredible opportunity to bring people together and to come to a common, better understanding of the issues that we need to address.
And I can't wait to be in a fly on the wall when all this group meets in global conferences. I know investors and bankers will be extremely keen to hear about developments, because this will drive the world economy over the next 8 years. This will be one of the keys to rapid transition, which is what we now are all committed to. We need to wrap up this session. I'm looking for final words. Marcel, I'll go to Bridget and Boulle first. Just reflections. Bridget and Boulle, you've been into the weeds of this process. It's challenging, as you know, because as you've said, because the Chinese taxonomy has developed a different sort of conceptual framework to the European taxonomy. And so finding the common ground has been difficult. Lessons learned, reflections for our audience. Maybe, Boulle, I can start with you first, and I'll go to Bridget. What would you be saying to other people about key lessons learned beyond what you've already covered in your PowerPoint, or final reflection?
I think, bear in mind that we are all aiming for a sustainable future and trying to understand what the other economy is trying to do or what effort they are making is very important for building a common language. That's my learning. Thank you. Very good.
Bridget, over to you.
Yeah, I think mine is that, like any task, before you start undertaking it, it seems like a mammoth task ahead and that it's impossible to do. But as soon as you start getting into the weeds of it, you realize that it's eminently possible. And I think for me, it's been a very optimistic process to see how we really are moving in the same direction, as Boulle said. And there's some technical details, but we really are moving in the same direction. So there's a lot to be optimistic about.
Marcel, parting thought, parting reflections.
Yeah, just very briefly. I think the work on the Common Ground Taxonomy is really the first. It's really an indispensable first step, but it is a very promising one. It's the beginning of a journey to improve comparability. It's not the end. It's a beginning, and I'm very optimistic that we can make very fast progress in the months to come.
Marcel Haag, thank you for the privilege of joining us today. And I'm going to say thank you for giving us hope with the work that you're doing at DG FISMA, with the work that the Commission is doing. You know, we do have an activist government now. We've got a government that is pushing for 55% cuts by 2030, is actually working hard on it, is bringing out a range of measures. You know, at last, as a European citizen, I can say I've got a government that is doing what we think needs to be done. So thank you for that work. But I have to say, Boulle, you need to pass on to your colleagues. Thank you for the leadership that's been shown by the Chinese authorities and the People's Bank of China that we've worked so closely with over the years in pushing green finance, especially when the economy, the supertanker of the Chinese economy, has been heading so strongly in one direction, and we know we've got to turn it around 90 degrees fast. It's very hard, but the top of the Chinese government is working very hard to do this, and we citizens of the world owe a great deal of thanks to that work that's going on. Thanks for the hope. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today, and we'll move on to our next session now. It's the Common Ground Taxonomy is something you'll hear more of a little later this year. As Marcel indicated, we'll launch the discussion paper in time for the COP. Very important for the COP. Now we're cutting to another session on the role of green bonds and net zero transition in partnership with the Climate Investment Coalition. Over to our producers.